Welcome everyone to this evening's talk on why recording local nature matters. My name is Ryan. I work for Cumbria Wildlife Trust on the Planting for Pollinators project as an ecologist there. And I'll introduce the project in a minute and showcase why recording really matters to the project and our conservation work. Outside of work, I spend a lot of my time going out there and making observations of wildlife, recording the species that I can see around me. And this is basically what I'm going to be talking to you about this evening. So pollinators are one of Cumbria Wildlife Trust's really key areas of work. So we have a couple of projects looking at how we can help to conserve projects. As a trust, we are really data-led. So we work really closely with key partners, especially the Biodiversity Record Centre for Cumbria, known as CBDC, Cumbria Biodiversity Record Data Centre, sorry. And later on, I'll talk to you a little bit about what they do. And knowing how our insects are faring is really important for us to help to conserve them. So it's really important for them, but it's also really important for us as well to be connecting with these insects and showing other people why they matter as well. And a key focus of this evening is also looking at local conservation. And this local conservation is helping us to build and deliver a wild Cumbria, so we can have nature in all of our lives. So this evening's talk really will look at a few key areas. We'll look at what is wildlife recording. Then we'll look at why do we record wildlife? Why do we spend time looking at making observations of wildlife and writing them down and submitting these records? And I'll also be talking about how you can get involved as well in a real variety of different ways. So firstly, I'm just going to speak a little bit about the Planting for Pollinators project. And here I hope you'll see how data is really important to our project here, but also just to highlight the work that we're doing. So Cumbria Wildlife Trust is working in partnership with Cumbria County Council and other key partners as well to deliver this project. And it's been developed by the Cumbria Local Nature Partnership. The project is building on the success of another pollinator project called Get Cumbria Buzzing. And this project, although it's had an extension, it's coming to an end now, but there's a real key event you can get involved with, which I'll tell you about at the end. So this Planting for Pollinators project is allowing us to expand the geographical area that we're working in and to develop new partnerships and habitat intervention as well, working a wider variety of habitats. And yeah, the project started back in September last year and runs until March 2023. And it's quite a big project for Cumbria Wildlife Trust. It's created full 8 roles or retained some roles as well. So this is really good, meaning that there's lots of people working on pollinators. And the project has been funded by the Green Recovery Challenge Fund and is administered through the National Lottery Fund. And I'll give you this link at the end as well, but you can find out more about the project there. I'm just going to highlight now some of the key things that we're doing in the project, if you haven't heard about it. So we're looking at reversing pollinator declines, and we're doing this by creating and enhancing a real variety of habitats that you can see on the slide there. So we're looking at a real variety of habitats and how we can help pollinators in these areas. And by helping pollinators, we're helping a whole other suite of both insects, but also plants and all sorts of other wildlife as well. And as you'll see on the next slide, we're doing this in really strategic corridors. So this allows us to make sure that species can move through the landscape, and we're providing food for them through plants, shelter, but also nesting sites as well. So we're doing a real variety of things. And the project focus is in this area. So this is North and West Cumbria. So we're working with these corridors called B-lines, which are the blue areas you can see on the map. So these are really important areas so that we can look at creating habitat and reducing the isolation and fragmentation between different habitats as well. So there's a beeline that runs along the coast from Calder Bridge in the south, up and north and west up here past up past Carlisle, up to Longtown, and then there's also east to west beeline as well, running along the A66, a really key trunk road for the county, but also really key areas of habitat. So you might have seen that Get Cumbria Buzzing has been doing work on this road and working on the road verges there. And then yeah, also linking everything up with the Solway coast as well. And we're working on a real variety of habitats, so everything from farmland and nature reserves, but also lots of community sites as well, bringing nature to the heart of people, people's livelihoods. So working on community grass and their village greens, sites like that, to enhance them for pollinators. And as part of this, we're growing lots of plants at our nursery up here in Carlisle. So we're growing over 50,000 plants for the project. And this is enabling us to grow plants that are really good for pollinators, but also peat-free and organic. We're also working on developing a seed bank. So the infrastructure for that has actually arrived this week. So we can collect seeds of local provenance and store them and use them in the future for our work, but also to hold them and protect those seeds for the future, working with the National Millennium Seed Bank. And to do this, we have to engage all of the communities that we work with. We facilitate these communities and individuals to act for pollinators in a real variety of ways. So we encourage them and engage them with volunteering. We help them to record pollinators and encourage them and empower them to make a difference in their local communities as well. And we couldn't do this without three members of key staff. These are our entry-level conservation officers. So here we've got Charlotte, Amelia and Kieran. And they are gaining all sorts of skills within the conservation sector and are involved in all the aspects of the works of the project and receiving lots of training as well, as you can see there. So these are key conservation skills, and through supporting them through the project, we're helping them to get jobs within the sector. And as you can see here, they get really stuck in. So this was them in action, searching for insects in a meadow. And the final part to highlight is developing a pollinator strategy for Cumbria. So this is really where a lot of the data comes into it. So this pollinator strategy is coordinated by Cumbria Local Nature Partnership, but we're trying to include all sorts of key stakeholders within that. And that includes all of you that are here today. We want to include as many people as possible, and there'll be a consultation coming out any day now. So look out for that on our website. So the pollinator strategy is a real key legacy for the project. We want to use all the knowledge and experience that we've gained through our pollinator projects and continue to do so throughout the pollinator projects to influence wider work for pollinators. So we're using these records that we're talking to you about this evening to highlight what we do and what we don't know about Cumbria's pollinators as well. So what we can do to help them by gaining knowledge. And we want to just raise awareness of pollinators as well across all sectors of Cumbrian society and seek commitments from all sorts of different people. So this could be people with a garden or a balcony up to big organisations and landowners to help support and deliver this important work. And finally, we want to highlight priorities for future projects. As I mentioned a minute ago, this project only runs until next year, and we want to continue that and develop these projects into the future. So as you can see there, these records and monitoring of wildlife is really important. And this is what I'm going to be talking to you about this evening. So just going to basically introduce the what wildlife monitoring and what wildlife recording is all about. So the first thing to point out is that wildlife monitoring is an area that the UK and the UK really leads on, really. We know more about our wildlife in the UK than we do in most other areas of the world. And most of this data is generated by unpaid amateurs, just people going out there and because they love wildlife and just making note of the species that they're seeing. And an incredible 7.5 million hours of this volunteer time goes into monitoring wildlife every year in the UK. So that's a huge amount of work, and that's estimated to be worth about £20.5 million. And this is a bit of an old statistic now, but just in the period from 2004 to 2014, there were over 200 peer-reviewed scientific papers published looking at this data. And so all of this data just collected by various people going out there and seeing what they could find. And this is contributing to papers helping to conserve species. And back in that 2004-2014 time, there were about 4.5 million records collected every year, but this number is increasing all the time, basically. So there are two main types of monitoring that I'm going to be talking to you about this evening. The first one is standardized monitoring. So this is almost like the gold standard of monitoring. It gives us really comparable data, which is repeatable, and we can get a lot more information from it because we can look at the abundances of species, their populations and stuff like that. But the key focus this evening is on insects, and for most insects we just can't do that because there's too many of them and they're not studied well enough. So we're really relying on ad hoc records, and this is what I refer to when I'm talking about biological recording, which we'll look at in a minute. And this generates really vast amounts of data for a huge variety of species, most of which there just aren't those standardized surveys for. And this is just, again, people going out there and just noticing the species, in their gardens, on their local walks, and contributing to real science. So now I'm going to delve a bit deeper into biological recording and what it's all about. As I've said, it's just documenting where species are found and when they're found as well. So there are 4 key parts to a record, as you can see on the slide here. So we're looking at the person that's gone out there and noticed the wildlife, the species that they've seen, where they've seen it, and also when they've seen it. And the importance of when they've seen it will become more apparent later on this evening. And really, I think these are key building blocks of this evidence-based conservation that is the gold standard and what we want to be basing all of our conservation decisions on. So these records are really fundamental to that. And biological recording is just the scientific study of where species are found. So when I'm referring to biological recording this evening, this is what I'm referring to. And this is really what we want to try and achieve with our wildlife and our observations. So we're all here because we love to go out there and see wildlife. We want more wildlife in the countryside and in our local spaces as well. So by seeing that wildlife and going out there and making a record, a note of what species have been seen, we hope that by sending in those records and them being collated, pulled together into bigger databases, we can analyze that data, so scientists can look at that data and give us a real key picture of how species are faring. And that in turn leads to research and basically leads to more conservation, which is leading to more species on the ground. So it's really, as you'll see this evening, it is a key part of that. So why do we record wildlife? So going out there and just seeing a species is basically what we enjoy the most. That's why we're here. But so yeah, it takes extra time to go out there and take a notebook and take photographs and make a record of what we're seeing. So here I'm going to describe why people record wildlife and the difference it makes to conservation. And basically, we're in a really important time at the moment, and these biological records and the people themselves, the biological recorders, have never been more important. I don't have to tell you that we're in the middle of an ecological crisis and also a climate crisis where, we're living in a nature depleted country, and climate change is having an effect on our wildlife as well. The money for conservation work is really tight. We don't have enough money to do everything that we want to be doing. And we need to ensure that our work is prioritized on the right things, and that our conservation measures and the money that we spend on conservation is as effective as possible. But also, recording wildlife is an opportunity for everyone to get involved. So just by going out there and taking your time and having a closer look at species, you can foster an understanding and an appreciation for nature. And also, technology is really changing the way we think about what a species actually is. So DNA is playing a big part in us understanding groups of species and where the lines are between them, and also how we can conserve the different variety between species, not just conserving individual species, but the different color patterns and the varieties between them. But mainly, it's a really enjoyable thing to do. It's a nice way to remember what you've seen, and also add to a real enjoyment of the walk, seeing the species that you're seeing, and almost adding to that list and seeing, especially at a local scale, the sheer variety of wildlife that you're seeing. And also, it's really enjoyable to learn more about the species as well. So this evening I'll talk a fair bit about the distribution of species, where they're actually found. But by going out there and looking at wildlife, we're also looking at their ecology, what they're actually doing in their environment. But just by slowing down and appreciating that wildlife, we can really learn about what they're doing with their lives, and anyone can make a significant contribution to that, especially with insects where they're less well studied. And it can also be really sociable as well. You don't have to go out there by yourself and do it. It's a really nice way to bring people together and spot wildlife, and it's a really nice thing for families to do as well. Going out there and seeing what species they can spot, and even making it into a competition with children to see, how many different leaves of plants they can find and contribute in that way. And I think it's important as well not to forget that human element to going out there and making these records. And a lot of the research is based on big data sets of records, and it's easy to lose track of the fact that each of these records is representing someone going out there and meeting a species. So Martin Harvey here, he gave a really good talk at a conference, and there he described each record representing a meeting between humans and a wild species there. So it allows us to connect with the wildlife around us and take note of it. So the first way that recording wildlife helps conservation is looking at managing sites. So taking an example of Cumbria Wildlife Trust here, we have lots of sites in which we manage, and we need to know essentially what species are there. It's important to know what habitats are there. Those habitats are made up of individual species. And as this evening's talk is really focused a lot on insects, insects can be really important at telling us how the site is faring. They, because they're quite small, they can respond to small scale differences in management. And this can help you to make sure that your management that you're doing is correct. Also, you might have key species on the site that you want to be conserving, and by going out there and monitoring them, that's really important in itself to make sure that your management is protecting those species. So these records are a key part of management plans, making sure that we highlight what species are there, and also any key species assemblages. So what I mean by species assemblages is just groups of species. So by looking at especially the invertebrates are found there, we can see that there might be small parts of sites that are especially important. So it could be little bits of damp grassland around the edges, or little patches of dead wood, which are easy to overlook or might not be seen as important by the general public, but therefore we can make sure that these sites are highlighted within the within management plans and stuff like that, but also within the interpretation, so the signage on our sites and all of the sort of the reserve guides and all that sort of stuff. We can highlight these the importance of these sites for species that can often be overlooked. And we can also use them to look at where we don't have records of species. So we'll see that there are big gaps in our knowledge this evening, and by looking at sites, we can see where these gaps are and where we can target getting people to come in and look for species. And as you'll see, there are big gaps in our knowledge for even some of the commonest and easiest to identify groups. So all of these records make a huge difference. And unfortunately, in many ways, these records also help us to protect some of these both reserves and other key green spaces, and highlight to people why they should be protected. We're all here because we love wildlife, but many people don't see that in the same way. So by having these records, we can help to highlight the importance of these areas, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that at a national scale later on. So a lot of that was talking about sort of designated sites and nature reserves and stuff like that. But a key thing to point out here is that every area matters, and records from anywhere are hugely important. And the areas that are beyond nature reserves and designated sites are often the ones that we know least about, but can be just as important, if not more so. So gardens are hugely important for wildlife if they're managed with wildlife in mind, or at least areas of them are. Road verges are huge areas of really good grassland, and obviously our project is working on helping to maintain those grasslands and make sure that they're managed favourably. But we need to monitor those sites as well, and they're really key areas for lots of insects. So knowing where those insects are on even areas of road verges is really important. And also from a human point of view as well, for many people, green spaces are often the only connection that they have to nature. I know out of the COVID pandemic, that really hit home for many people, just the importance of those local green spaces. So to help protect those sites and foster that connection, then making notes of observations are a nice way to do that. So this sort of highlights what I was just saying, but yeah, we just need to know where species are found, and that helps to protect the sites. And we also, by connecting people to sites, it allows them to have more of an investment in that site and want to protect into the future. And a key thing to point out here as well is that no matter how common the species is, those records are really important as well. So if we talk about in some respects having rare species helping to protect the site, but all of those records of commoner species as well are really important and really link into our understanding of how species are faring, because it's those common species that often when they start to become less common, that's the real canary in the mine and the real trigger for us to reevaluate things and try and levy more support for conservation on sites. So common species and records of common species are really important. So at the most simple and fundamental level, records just tell us where species are found, and they give us, because they've got that date information, it tells us when they've been found in certain areas as well, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But for now, records just show us where species are found. So and on this side we can see a gatekeeper, and we can see where in Britain and Ireland the gatekeeper is found and where it's been recorded. So that's the most simple use for biological records. And by pulling all that data together, we can look at these distributions and how this changes over time. So these are really quite old figures now, as you'll see, they sort of lead up to 2010. But they're really important just to show you that even back then there were about 10,000 species covered in printed atlases, so actual books. But many atlas maps and distribution maps are now online, where they're readily available for everyone, and you can therefore see what's in your local area. But they're also really repeatable, so we can see how distributions are changing over time. So an example here is the maps of the elephant hawk moth. So here's a national atlas. So this is the Atlas of Britain and Ireland's larger moths, produced by with data from butterfly conservation. So you can see there the distribution of the elephant hawk moth, and as you can see, it appears really widespread. It goes up all the way into Scotland and covers most of Ireland, although quite patchily. But this is likely due to be down to less people recording wildlife there. But we also get local atlases as well. So this is a page from the Cumbria Larger Moth Atlas. So here you can see a map of Cumbria, and you can see where the elephant hawk moth again has been recorded within Cumbria. And here we can see two different coloured squares. So the squares that aren't filled in are records from before 2000, and then the green filled in dots are records from 2000 onwards. So there we can see, basically at the most fundamental level, where the elephant hawk moth has been seen. And again, this is really reliant on where people have noticed it. There are obviously large areas of the Lake District without records, and that could be because there are less people, well, it probably is due to there being less people there looking with moth traps and stuff like that, due to there actually being less people living in the Lake District compared to areas such as Carlisle. So here are a few of the Cumbrian atlases, and these are all freely available on the Cumbria Biodiversity Data Centre website. So you can see on the end here, this is the moth one, and they've also got ones for actually two on types of birds. There's one on mammals, and then one on dragonflies as well. And at the moment, there's work on a Cumbria Bumblebee Atlas, which will be launched in the coming months. So this is really exciting to be able to map out where Cumbria's bumblebees are found and how this has changed over time. And these publications are more than just collections of maps. They give information about the species and where they're found, and highlight the gaps in recording and all sorts of different things like that. So far we've mainly looked at just where species are found, and often looking at all records across larger spans of time. But for better recorded species, we can look at the changes in distribution as well. So this is a non-insect example, but yellowhammers. So you probably can't see very well on the screen because it really helps you to zoom in. But you can see most of Britain and Ireland is blue, and that is where the yellowhammer has been present in both time periods that have been looked at. And there are some blue arrows pointing upwards, and they indicate where the species wasn't found in the first time period, but has subsequently been recorded in the second time period. So these might be gains, or they might just be the fact that people have looked harder for them. But more worryingly, they're the darker downward pointing arrows sort of in these areas over to the west. And this is where the yellowhammer was recorded in the first time period, but wasn't found again in the second time period. So this highlights where the species might have been lost. Another example here on the right-hand side is that of the common butterfly. So this was a species that in the first time period, the purple dots, so up until 1982, didn't go much above Norfolk and Wales in Britain. But as you can see, and as some of you will know if you've spotted common butterflies, the species is now spread up into Scotland. So we can look at the changes in distribution of species over time. Another example, and one for you to start looking out for now, is that of the ivy bee. So this is a really interesting species of solitary bee. It was first described new to science in 1993, so not that long ago. It first colonized Britain in 2001, and the species has spread from there, likely due to climate change. And it started off in the southeast corner of England and has spread up. And now there are a few dots around Carlisle and a few records from the south of Cumbria and sort of the Lancashire border. But there are big areas where the species hasn't been recorded. So yeah, it's a really nice species to look out for. And the reason why I mention it now is because it's an autumn flying species. So the species is only just coming out now, and it collects pollen exclusively from ivy. So if you've got an ivy bush near you, do take a look out for this this species here, the ivy bee. This is the female at the bottom and the male at the top. So keep a lookout for this species, and I've got my email address at the end, and do let us know if you spot the species, or as you'll learn about, you can submit the records yourself. So I touched briefly on climate change there, and climate change is having a big effect on our species, and going out there and just noticing what species are around is helping us to look at how species might be affected in the future due to climate change. So it's important for conservation, so we can look how we might be able to help these species move northwards, because they live within a certain temperature zone, and as the temperature is warming up, they want to be able to move northwards in many cases to stay within that same sort of temperature band. But also species are coming over, like the ivy bee, which is not having any negative effect on and probably having a really good positive effect on Britain. But there might be other species that are new pests for us to look out for, or new diseases that might affect agriculture. So by having these records, we can map when these species arrive and the effects that they might have. And I've got a nice example of that in a minute. The example on the right-hand side here looks at the red-tailed bumblebee. So this is a really of our commonest bumblebee species. And scientists can look at where the species might be found in the future, basically. So they do something fancy called climatic niche modeling, where they just overlay the sightings of people spotting the species with temperature data, and they see where the temperature zone might be in the future. And under these predictions, the species is thought to have been lost. Well, likely that it might be lost from southern Britain by 2100, basically. So we can look at that and also see which new species might colonize. Delving a bit deeper as well, I spoke before about timing being really important. So the date that you're seeing things. So we can look at something called phenology, and this is the timing of these life history events. So the timing of when species are doing things. So if we have records of when species are plant species are flowering, or when butterflies are flying, then we can see how this might change over time, or how it is changing over time, and how it might change into the future. So this first example here is the bud burst of oaks. So the first leaves on the oaks, and this graph here shows that this is becoming sooner in the year. So this axis here starts up in May and goes down to March. So the bud burst is getting earlier and earlier. So we can look at that, but we can also look at how things like this might affect other species. So the examples on the right here look at two bird species. The first one, the great tit. So the great tit wants to time when it's laying its eggs and having young with the peak number of caterpillars. So this was the usual picture. So in spring, when it wants the sun for the eggs to develop and keep warm, and then it wants all the young to hatch out at the time when there's the most number of caterpillars for them to feed, for the adults to collect for the young. But there's a bit of a mismatch. Now the great tits are laying earlier, and this can be mismatched with the peak number of caterpillars. So you end up with young being produced when there aren't so many caterpillars around, which can obviously have huge effects. So it's not just about when individual species are around and what they're doing, it's about how this overlays with other species. And the American robin, so this is obviously isn't a British species, but this example here looks at migration. So climate change is happening at different rates in different places. So the cues that species are picking up on and telling them when to migrate can be different in these areas. So this is the normal picture, how it used to be, where the American robin would come over and lay pretty soon after it's migrated, and this would be a key time for it to produce young. Whereas what it's doing now is it's picking up on cues saying now's the time to migrate, and it therefore can arrive too early where the conditions aren't so good in the country it's arriving in. So then it's got a bit of a lag before it can start to have successful nests, which again can have an effect on it. And yeah, climate change can have an impact on invasive species and which species are colonizing Britain. And to know which species are colonizing Britain, we need records, and that comes from just general members of the population. Records for the harlequin ladybird here. So it started to colonize in the southeast and has spread up from there. And this map on on the right hand side here shows how widespread the species is now. So that in itself tracks where the species is. But by overlaying that with other maps of other species, we can look at the effect that this invasive species is having on our other ladybirds. So one study looked at nearly 90,000 records of ladybirds. These were all found by members of the public, and then were looked at by experts. And it was found that once colonized, the harlequin ladybird, it was having a significant negative impact on the distribution of all but one of the 8 species that were studied. So we can look at how this invasive species is having an effect on other species. We can also look at just how many species are in an area as well. So now obviously this is often related to temperature and habitats and stuff like that. But again, we could just look at where the key places are for individual groups of species. So this is just a nice example of where the most moths are found, and as you can imagine, they tend to be in the southeast, these darker purple areas, and you tend to have fewer moths as you go further north and west. But you get different moths as well. So this doesn't tell the whole picture, but is a nice way to represent the data. So we've spoken about distributions, but we can also look at how species are faring. So a few examples here. So we can look at nationally how species are faring. So this document here looks at the vascular plants, so the flowering plants, the normal plants you see, and which ones are rarer than others, basically, and which ones are red listed. So which ones are most likely to be need conservation work, or ones that we hold significant populations for. So we can do that at a more national level, at sort of Britain and Ireland or England, but we can also look at the key priorities for our counties, such as Cumbria. So we can look at the species that are faring well, where other counties might not have those species in such high abundance, or areas where the species might be widespread but might be on the northern or the southern limit of its distribution in Cumbria. So areas where we hold key populations and can help to conserve them. We can also look at things called status reviews, which basically do the same thing. And this is one. Obviously, you can't see the detail here, but this is an example for dung beetles. So we can look at which dung beetles are faring better than other dung beetles, and a key thing there is to be able to represent this data and show it to people like the government, and to sort of summarize all of this data and put it in front of people that make decisions. And hot off the press, I think it was actually only yesterday, there was a 2022 butterfly red list produced. And again, this is based on just people spotting things, but also more standardized data, which I'll talk about in a minute. But there, out of the 62 species that they assessed, 4 of them are still extinct. So these are the black-veined white, the large tortoiseshell, the large copper, and the Marazine blue. So species that haven't been in Britain for a while. The large tortoiseshell does occasionally pop up at the moment, but not in a sustainable fashion. They found out that 24 in butterfly species, so 41%, are threatened with they could become extinct, and another 5 are near threatened. So again, a conservation priority. And some of you might have seen the State of Nature report as well. So these are produced every 3 years. And the key thing to highlight here is just, again, this is all based on data that just average people going out there and spotting wildlife and making records are helping to contribute to. So they pull in all of this data and look at standardized monitoring as well. And they can produce figures and give this to the government and try and highlight how wildlife is doing and link into the biodiversity indicators. And these are things that the government report on in terms of how species are faring. But one of the key things to focus about here is there's just little point mentioned here. 1% of fungi and 12% of insects were assessed. So that means that only 12% of insects have enough data for us to be able to look at how they're actually faring. So the more data that we can look at, the more we get a picture of how species are actually faring. And again, all of this data is interpreted for people to be able to have a look at and a wide audience to see how species are faring and how key factors are affecting them. So hopefully I've convinced you just how important records are and this monitoring is. And now I'm going to talk to you about how all of you can get involved and the key ways that you can do that, basically. So firstly, I'm going to talk to you briefly about standardized surveys. So I haven't touched so much on this at the moment because there's really specific things you can get involved with. But as I said earlier, these are the gold standards. These are the best way that we can see how species are faring. So firstly, plants are really fundamental to our knowledge of key habitats and also intrinsically important in themselves. So a standardized way that you can get involved is through the National Plant Monitoring Scheme. So this looks at the distribution of plants, which, as you've seen, is really important, but it also has the added value of looking at the abundance. So seeing how many plants are in an area and how this is changing, and looks at how habitats change over time. So the same square is looked at every year, and you can see how grassland might turn into scrub and woodland, or how areas of key grassland might be become less good and not managed appropriately and become less species rich, stuff like that. Again, this is a survey that anyone can get involved with. You just have to be able to identify between 25 and 30 key indicated species within your plot. Because it's a standardized survey, there are random squares across Britain, so you have to have a look at this website here, the National Plant Monitoring Scheme website, and there they highlight which empty squares are near you, basically. So you go out there and do a survey twice a year and monitor which species are in your plot. So really nice thing to do and contribute to some really important data. You can also get involved with things called with transects, and these are where you walk in a specific route and record the species that you see within a certain area of yourself. So usually a sort of 1.5 meter buffer either side of you. And here again, you're recording the abundance data. So for example, butterfly transects, you're counting how many butterflies you're seeing in each of the sections. And therefore, we can see how that is changing over subsequent years. So we can see if meadow browns, for example, a common species, are becoming less common in your area. And although they might not be lost from the area, if they're becoming less common, then that's really important data. So that's butterfly transects. But you can also do bee walks. So this focuses on bumblebees. So you look at the bumblebee species along a linear walk, again, a really key way to both get to grips with identifying bumblebees, but also, again, contributing to some really important data. And there are also dragonfly transects, so this works in a similar way. But again, these are just a few key groups. For most species, these surveys don't exist just because they're more difficult for standardized surveys to exist. And the big butterfly count is just finished, but I know many people take part in this, and this is a really key example, again, of a standardized survey and a way that people are generating really important data, often without knowing it. So this is a timed count. You record for a certain period of time, and you record the number of each individual species that you see. So therefore, you're gathering this important information, and it's a really nice thing for families to be able to get involved with, because it brings families together looking at wildlife. And another example of pollinators is this fairly recent survey called the UK part of the UK Pollinator Monitoring Scheme. So again, these are key things that the government looks at, and it gives us new insight into the number of insects that play a role in pollination. And again, a really nice thing for people to get involved with. You don't have to identify individual species. You just need to know if you've seen one of these key groups. So a bumblebee, a solitary bee, a hoverfly, another fly, a butterfly, or a moth. And you just look at target flowers. So you look at specific flowers, and there's lots of key resources as well to help you. So I'm just going to play a quick video now to highlight these flower insect time counts. So these are what you're doing, and a really key way to gather lots of really useful information as well. super. Yeah, apologies about the video at the end there. I knew it would fail on me at one point, but it's a really nice way to do something throughout the year, going out there and counting pollinators, and something that everyone can get involved with. So those examples, we're looking at more standardized methods. But what about when you're just going out there and noticing random species on your walk? What can you do with that information? So this next part looks at these other records, these ad hoc records, just records of species. So as I mentioned briefly earlier, we look at 4 key parts to a record. So the first bit is you, the person who's gone out there and noticed the species. There might also be someone else called the determiner. So this is the name of the person that's actually identified the species. In many cases, it'll be you, but there might be someone else that helped you to identify that species. So all of that information is kept with that record as well. The next part is then the individual species that you saw. So this could be the common name or the scientific name of that species. The key thing there is to just be as accurate as you can. The next bit is where, and that's the name of the site or the village or the road that you saw the species on, or the nature reserve or whatever, and the grid reference as well. So I'll briefly speak about that in a second. And the fourth key part is just the date, when you actually saw that species. So for those of you that are familiar with ordnance survey maps and stuff like that, this will be familiar to you, but grid references are in many other areas have become more obsolete as we've tend to use other digital solutions and stuff like that. But basically, don't be afraid of grid references, and they're a really important part of records. And there's some really nice solutions to it to help work out the area that you're in. And the reason why these grid references are so important is that it helps us to make sure that the location name is correct. And you can be really accurate about where you've seen that species as well. So that again can help you to refine that species in the future and monitor populations and stuff like that. Yeah, so basically you can be as accurate as you like, but the smaller the area, so the more numbers within your grid reference, the better, basically. And yeah, some really key websites. So this is something actually produced by Bedfordshire and Natural History Society further south, but this is a website called Grab a Grid Reference, and there you can just put in your postcode or whatever, and it will show you an ordnance survey map, and also Google Maps, I think this is, and allow you to pinpoint where you were and get a grid reference that enables you to include that with your record. And you'll see in a minute, most of the actual online ways to record species can do this for you. So I spoke about the 4 key parts of a record, but basically the more information that you have, the better. So if you know any of these things, then include it with your record. So the sex, if it was a male or a female, or if you're recording bumblebees, if it was a queen or a worker or whatever. The stage, so if it's an adult or if you found caterpillars, stuff like that. If you did use any methods, so if you had a moth trap and attracted stuff, if you did a specific walk, or if you went and like shook a bit of a tree and saw what insects you got there, anything that enables you to look at how you found the species. If you've got any evidence, so if you've taken photos of your of the species, then that adds value to the record as well. If you're looking at flowers, if the species was in flower or if it was fruiting, any associations with other species as well. So for this marmalade hoverfly here, it was feeding on white bryony. So that again links together these records and looks at the food plants or the nectar and the pollen that species are collecting, and also the behaviour as well, so what the individuals were doing. Just a few tips as well on photos. Obviously, the more photos you can get, the better. So you want close-up, clear photos, but any photo is better than no photo. So we're telling you, ways to get the best photos, and obviously that's better. But if you only have one blurry photo or a series of blurry photos, then that's better than nothing. And often for the more recognizable species, then that's enough to evidence your record. And when we're basing conservation decisions on these records, then that can be really important. So for pollinators, just looking at a general picture of it and trying to capture different angles of a species can be really good. And the same with plants, really, getting a picture of the whole plant, see how big it is, but then photographing the leaves and the flowers and stuff like that, which can be really difficult to remember to do that when you're trying to do that in the field, and you're just excited because you found something nice. And let's go talk about where to actually send your records. So there's something called the NBN Atlas, which I'll show you in a minute. And this is the endpoint really. It pulls together lots of data. To get records there, they go through this two-step process called validation first and then verification. So validation looks at if you've got those parts of the record that I spoke about before, and that your grid reference matches up with the name of the area. And then verification is an expert looking at if you've correctly identified the species, or if it's likely to be correct, because you don't need to evidence everything that you're seeing. I've spoken a little bit about Cumbria Biodiversity Data Centre, CBDC, and I'll talk more about them on the next slide. But they pull together data at a local level, and they have that local knowledge as well. And this data therefore feeds into planning applications and stuff like that. So planning applications that are going to affect biodiversity get data from the record centre. So we need to make sure the record centre has that information. But often the expertise in species and how they're varying at a national level is in these national recording schemes. So we need a way that we can get them to everyone in the most simple way. So to briefly mention what record centres do, they consolidate data, they pull it all together and put it into their database. They also support recorders, the people going out there making these observations. So they provide lots of resources and stuff like that. They hold all of the information and share it with those that need it. So as I mentioned, it goes to consultants when they're and the local authorities when planning decisions have been made. But they also provide it to others for research at all sorts of different levels. They have that species information, but also habitat information, designation of sites, and also geological information as well. They also advocate for this evidence-based decision making, so they make sure that this data is being used. But they also do all sorts of different things. So each record centre is really different. And if you haven't heard of Cumbria Biodiversity Data Centre, then do Google them and have a look at their website and see all the things that they do. National recording schemes. So there's a huge list there scrolling down your page of all the different groups, and there's over 100 of them. And they just pull together the data for individual species groups. So there might be one for mammals, or it might be one for an individual, for butterflies, moths, or bees, or whatever. So they're the ones that produce the national distribution maps and do status reviews. And so a link up with the record centres as well. We also have the NBN Atlas. So I spoke about this before, and this pulls together the information, and you can see the distribution of species as well. So this is map of the red fox, and that just nicely shows where the red fox is, and you can zoom in there and see the individual squares where the red fox has been recorded. And the MBN then pass these records onto the Global Biodiversity Information Fund, I think they're called, and they pull together all of the information at an international level, so they do world distribution maps. I'm now quickly talk to you about two key places that you can submit your records and the differences between them. So the first one here is called iRecord, and so it's a website and it's also an app, and it takes you through the process of recording your species. So using the fox example there, you put in fox, and there's drop downs to say if it was an adult, or if you can tell if it's a male or female or whatever, the date and your name and stuff like that. And then you click on the map and pinpoint where you saw the fox. And that data then goes both to the local record centre and also to the National Recording Scheme. So that data is available to everyone to look at and to use. So it's a really quite intuitive website, and it's a good way to pull together your records, and you can attach photos and stuff like that. Another alternative is this system called iNaturalist, and if you're starting out, this can often be an easier system to use. Again, it's a website and an app, and a key thing here is that it helps you to identify the species that you've seen through sort of crowdsourcing. So you can provide an idea of what you think it is, and people will help back that up or suggest alternatives. But it's also got, let's go to the next slide here, it's got a system called Seek built into it. So it can look at if you've got a picture of the species and help you to tell what species it might be. And then actual people will help you to look at the photos and help check that that's correct. So again, the record centre can use this information, and the record centre now holds 2.1 million records due to the fact that just average people going out there and recording these species. So yeah, this is again a really nice way to record wildlife, and if you use it on your phone, it'll work out where you are using your phone's GPS and help you to work out that location, and it'll sort out all the grid reference stuff for you there. And just finally, yeah, highlighting that there are lots of resources to help you with identifying things. So it's best to start with recording species that you're confident on, and practice doing that and continue to record those species. But there are lots of resources on the internet to help you identify species, and through Cumbria Wildlife Trust, there's been some really nice insect talks, especially on bumblebees and solitary bees, to help you identify them. But there are a huge amount of videos that can help you to identify species and learn more about them. So really our challenge to you is to get out there and just make your first record if you haven't made one before. It can be of anything. Even a record of a nettle is useful in the oval picture to see how where they're faring and where they're found. All species matter. So yeah, hopefully you've seen this evening that records are really important, and by just generating once, so going out there, making that observation, they're used for all sorts of purposes, in some cases hundreds of different purposes. That standardized monitoring that I spoke about is really important and gives us additional information about how populations are faring. But those ad hoc observations are really important as well. And that anyone can go out there and make a difference, and it's a significant difference and really fun to do. Just before I have a look at any questions, just to highlight a event that Cumbria Wildlife Trust has got coming up next month. So we're having this really exciting event called the Big Buzz Conference and Fringe. So a festival to celebrate pollinators, look at pollinator conservation and how you can help pollinators. So there's going to be a conference up in Carlisle, but it'll also be live streamed. And Bridget Strawbridge, the author, will be hosting that. But we've got talks from people like Dave Goulson and key pollinator people. So the conference is between the 23rd and the 25th, and there'll be all sorts of different events going on. So do take a look at the Big Buzz Festival website to see what Cumbria Wildlife Trust is up to. So yeah, thank you all for listening this evening, and also thank you to our funders, the Green Recovery Challenge Fund and the National Lottery, for supporting this project to help conserve pollinators in Cumbria. I'll just leave this up in case any of you have any questions after this evening that you'd like to drop me an email